by those who fight for big government and orchestrate for big government, and this has been going on a long time before 9/11. It's been going on too long in this country, essentially for the past 100 years in a deliberate fashion. But the whole purpose of getting people to capitulate, the way they do this is they have to build up fear in the hearts and the mind of the people. The people have to believe that if I don't have government to take care of me, then I won't have a job, I won't have any wealth, I won't have medical care, I won't get an education, and everything is dependent on the government. So if you have a depression come along, such as we had in the 30s, instead of blaming the government that was at fault, what they'll do is they'll say, aha, the only way you can do this is turn all the responsibility over to the government. And the same way after 9/11. It was a great opportunity, and some of the neoconservatives admitted it. This is an opportunity for us to promote our views, because people are fearful. And when people are fearful, not only do they give up their economic freedoms, but too often they'll give up their personal liberties. But there's one conclusion I've come to about all the things that have been passed and all the bad legislation that has been passed by 9/11, is that there is absolutely no reason ever to give up any personal liberty to be safe. Matter of fact, if you want to be safe, the more freedom you have, the safer you'll be. We do not need the government taking care of it. I'm also convinced that if we had had a better understanding about personal property rights and responsibility and the Second Amendment, 9/11 probably would have never occurred. Since 9/11, we as a people have been too willing to give up our freedoms with the idea that we will be safe and secure. I still hear people coming up to me and they say, well, you're right about this, we have to be free, but if we're not alive, we can't be free. And they say that the government has to do this, and this is why we have been tolerating so much at our airports, which 90% of that is really not necessary. That doesn't make us freer. Never quite understood if I had a slightly larger than authorized tube of toothpaste, if they take that from me, I'm supposed to feel safer and freer by this. But you know, the problems actually started before 9/11. Much of the legislation that was passed immediately afterward had been proposed before 9/11, and it was seen as an opportunity. For instance, the bill that I strongly opposed and strongly voted against, and I'm proud of the vote, and that was not to pass the Patriot Act. But the way they do it is they put it up, they call it the Patriot Act. How can anybody vote against patriotism? And the members of Congress, quite frankly, I know for certain that none of them had a chance to read it before it was voted for in the House of Representatives, because the bill appeared in the morning a couple hours before we were voting on it, and it was very, very complex. There was no way they could have read it. So when I asked other members, why are you voting for this? You haven't even read it. They said, well, people are fearful. We had 9/11. People want us to do something. And they never asked the question and assumed the responsibility. Well, yes, do something, but if you do something wrong, isn't that terrible too? But no, they went along with it, and then they passed the Military Commissions Act, which is another thing. The Military Commissions Act actually has done something that not only has it undermined our Constitution, but it literally has undermined something 800 years old, and that is habeas corpus. Can you imagine that we have done that? So my position on that is obviously not only to protect our Constitution, but to protect the traditions of habeas corpus for all Americans, all citizens. have such little protection of our civil liberties, whether it's been through regulations, defiance of the law, or the passing of the law. Sometimes our administration was doing one thing and Congress would come along and rubber stamp it. So we have not had very good balance of power in Washington. We've had no checks and balances. Today we have secret prisons, secret renditions. We can have secret testimony against us. We can have surveillance in our home with sneak and peek searches, and they don't even have to tell us. And if you are under surveillance and the government comes and searches your place, they instruct you and you break the law if you tell anybody about it. That's how bad it has gotten. I think we've moved into an age where we have been too reluctant to accept, we've been too ready to accept signing statements and executive orders. But I can tell you one thing. If I am to be your president, I will never use executive orders and never use signing statements to change the law. Accepting the notion that we have to have a national ID card. If we have a free society and recognize the position that we have a right to our life, and we have a right to our liberty, and we have a right to pursue our happiness, and we have a right to keep the fruits of our labor, it means but one thing about our tax system. We will have no income tax and repeal the 16th Amendment.
Income taxes are theft!
There's another way they tax us as well, and it's a very vicious, secretive tax that we've been suffering from, and that's called the inflation tax. To get rid of the inflation tax, you understand the monetary issue. You want monetary reform, and you want to obey the Constitution about that. We would not have a central bank. We would do away with the Federal Reserve System.
Tax me, bro!
1913 was a bad year. Must have been an unlucky year for America. You know, it was the income tax, and it was the Federal Reserve System. It was a foreign policy change that Wilson brought in, and we're still following it in one sort of way, making the world safe for democracy and all the other nonsense that they spout. But it was a bad year, but it's been continuing in that way. But the foreign policy needs to be changed. We don't need to just change the management of the war. We need a foreign policy of non-intervention which will prevent the wars from breaking out.